Hi, I'm John Hockenberry. I'm here in the studio with a panel of guests to further discuss the issues raised by the documentary you just watched. Joining me tonight are Dr. M. Zuhdi Jasser. Dr. Jasser graduated from the Medical College of Wisconsin and is now a practicing physician in Phoenix, Arizona. Dr. Jasser, you will recognize him, was in the documentary you just saw. And Rafia Zakaria. Ms. Zakaria is an attorney currently completing her doctorate in political science at Indiana University. She teaches courses on U.S. constitutional law, political philosophy, and Islam and politics. And Ahmed Rehab. Mr. Rehab is the Chicago area executive director of CAIR, the Council on American Islamic Relations. All three of my guests tonight are Muslim Americans, but they have differing views about the documentary and the issues it raises. Welcome to all three of you.
Thank you.
Dr. Jasser, are there very different ways in the Muslim world to project your Islamic identity politically without endorsing Al-Qaeda, etc., or do you think Islamist generally refers to a radical violent element?
There are militant Islamists that want to use violent means to achieve their political ends, and then there's the run-of-the-mill Islamists such as Tariq Ramadan or Sayyid Qutb from the Muslim Brotherhood or other political parties that believe that this general construct for politics and government is based on the Quran as the central constitution. And then from that, all laws comes from the source, which is the Quran, rather than the Quran being a source. And thus, they have political parties that are moved on the construct that clerics and imams have a central role in guiding government. They're not violent. They could be against terrorism. They could be for democracy in parliaments. But yet the guiding construct of their legal system is one based on Sharia law, and it could be anything from the fundamentalists, such as the Hudud laws, to the more liberal interpretation, but still it's a religious construct, and I think it's inferior to that of American systems because those that are Jewish, Christian, or non-Muslim have no way to participate in that government because they can't write laws for it.
So how is what you're describing, the sort of church and state issue that you've raised right now, different from the "in God we trust," that's on the penny in America? Mainstream red state Americans believe that we're basically a religious nation, faith-based, and usually that's Christianity. Yes, there's a lot of tolerance, but the mission of religion and the mission of government aren't necessarily widely divergent.
You want people that want to live in freedom and liberty to be empowered and inspired by religious values and to be inspired by their faith personally. The difference is Islamists believe that the interpretation of law is that which is, how do we interpret what God meant in the laws of the Quran, and that's what we want to enact in our laws and legislature. You're empowered by your morality, but you don't argue the scriptural interpretation of what God meant. You saw in the documentary, the Imam held the Quran and said, this is in the book. Well, who says that's what's in the book? It's his interpretation. And I think we abrogate religion completely, and it's no longer religion when we tell people this is the way it should be and we force them. Religion needs to be by free will, and then we enact our laws as we do as humans.
Ahmed, how many Muslims do you think, globally or even among the people that you have most direct contact with, truly endorse a Sharia law style of government, whether it be in America, the land that they're living, or as some sort of return to a place of origin, be it Arabia or even Indonesia or Malaysia, Islamic countries?
Yeah, I think it's important to pause and define the word Sharia itself before we ask that question or attempt to answer it. And often it is defined as a sort of law that governs a state or a nation state. But Sharia has many aspects to it that governs our daily lives as individuals or communities or families. And with the latter definition, I think many Muslims aspire to have Sharia govern their daily lives. But if you use the former definition, where Sharia is the law of the land, I would say that the majority of Muslims actually support their current countries, their current governments, are attempting to be upright citizens of a democratic, pluralistic society in which they live. Definitely the case in America.
How do church and state issues in the U.S. Constitution differ from church and state issues in a Islam and politics kind of context in an Islamic constitution?
Like most American Muslims, I support the separation of church and state as it is, put forth in the U.S. Constitution. I teach constitutional law. But I think it's important not to take the American frame and use it as, the kind of universal frame of reference for for all Muslim countries. And that's the problem with, taking this idea and saying that all Muslims need to follow this. The fact is that in most Muslim countries, take Pakistan, where I'm from, religion and law are much more intertwined, and the legal history is much more intertwined than than it was in the U.S. or than it is in the U.S. And the problem is that in a democratic constitution, when you come up with a constitution, it has to have the support of most people. If most people in Pakistan want a constitution that intertwines faith and law, they are entitled to that. That's their right as a sovereign nation.
There are many propositions within the documentary, but one that stands out is that there is a fight right now for the hearts and minds of the broad Muslim sort of civilization, the broad Muslim electorate, the politically relevant, politically engaged Muslims of the world. And that it appears, at least from this documentary, that so-called moderates in that struggle for hearts and minds are either losing or are sort of at the tough end of some very, very serious tactics to suppress them. First of all, is there a battle for the hearts and minds of Muslims? And if so, who's winning? Dr. Jasser? I'm
a conservative Muslim. I pray and fast, and I go to mosque regularly, and I have this battle against the clerical theocrats is, in my mind, as I read American history, the same one that our forefathers fought against the Church of England.
I understand your argument. I guess the question I'm asking is that message persuasive to Muslims? Is there a battle for the hearts and minds of Muslims, and is your argument prevailing, or are other arguments prevailing?
Right now, our argument hasn't even been given a chance. I think that it's going to take a generation or two for this argument to settle in, but certainly I think it's a minority position. How minority? I would say 40% or so, but yet only 30% of Muslims are mosque-going, and of those 30%, only 5 to 10% actually are active in political organizations such as CAIR and other ones.
Is your position a minority because it has been suppressed, or because it is, as characterized in the documentary, in an extreme position? There are people in the documentary who describe certain moderates who participate in secular institutions as being non-Muslim.
Well, certainly, as they struggle to maintain their power, as you saw the Imam in Phoenix, he described me as a liberal extremist. Most of my friends laughed and said, I couldn't believe that you were described as an extremist. But the bottom line is they view that anyone that wants to allow religious choice and practice to be the domain of an individual over the community and to deconstruct the politicization of the Ummah as a nation.
Ummah meaning the broad nation of Muslims throughout the world.
And to relegate the Ummah simply to social issues, theological instruction, charity, and teaching our children. Other than that, I view no need for the Ummah anymore as we live in our own nation states.
I think there's definitely a problem out there with individuals, organizations, movements that aspire to hinge their political aspirations on Islam and to seek to bring a legitimacy to their own ways of thinking by pinning that on Islam. And I think Zuhdi and others are right to stand up and oppose that. I think the problem that Zuhdi and others do project, especially in this documentary, is where they generalize and where they say that the majority of Muslims are of this caliber, whereas that's not true. The majority of Muslims are moderates. The majority of Muslims are sane individuals who are going about their lives as others do. And the other problem is that they don't quite refer or talk about extremism when it projects itself in other communities, such as in the Christian community, where we have definitely an issue with political Christianity as well in America, evangelism and other movements, where probably they have a higher chance of affecting the political future of this country than Muslims do at the moment.
This movie is not saying that they're not sane individuals. This movie is saying that that a significant, if not those in control of the American Muslim community, believe in political Islam. They believe in imposing or enacting and using the mosques as the pulpits or the mimbars for their own political agenda.
Well, but how is that different from an Episcopal minister talking about current affairs in the sermon in a Christian church on Sunday?
It's very different, because that minister still, when he goes to Congress, cannot wave his Bible and talk about canon law as him being the only person that can interpret canon law. Well, the imam dismisses me as having any authority because I don't have a degree in Sharia and because I'm not from Al-Azhar or trained in Saudi Arabia.
That's untrue. That's untrue. I mean, Muslim